Okay, well, Shabbat Shalom, those of you who are on YouTube. It is past the mid or the center or the median of the counting of the Omer. I believe it's necessarily that we do a little bit of recap, but I want to start with the fact that there is a dramatic shift that occurs during the counting of the Omer that a lot of people don't notice, but is evidenced actually in the Torah. So first of all, let's talk about the wilderness season. What does it involve? Well, in order to understand the wilderness season, we need to understand the golden calf season. And I'm going to put that on the board here in a minute. But the point being is that just like 9/11, the assault on the United States World Trade Center back in 2001 in September on the 11th day, we have a correspondence with Torah and dates and occurrences. Let me explain. So remember, there was actually a big anti-Semitic movement at the time of 9/11 because over, I think, 3,000 Jews took the day off or were somehow not present in the um in the attack on the World Trade Centers. And everybody was like, well, how did they know? And instead of checking Torah and understanding all of that, they decided that it must have been a conspiracy. Well, of course, that was very quickly cleared up when the Anti-Defamation League got involved, and all of a sudden people stopped saying the things that they were saying. But what was really overlooked is the fact that the 9/11 attack occurred on the commandment of the seventh month, which included, but was not limited to, the Shemitah, which is the 7-year cycle of giving the land rest. And then we have a secondary element we need to call into question or into position here, and that is when Jeremiah in the book of Lamentations is sitting in the rubble of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been completely destroyed. And I want you to recall that there was actually an imprisonment of Jeremiah, and then he's released after Jerusalem is destroyed. So there's a few reasons why this is important, but the most important one is he says, now the land enjoys its Sabbath. Right now we're going to have the Shemitahs scheduled because nobody's here. The land is actually going to get to go fallow for a while. Interestingly enough, Jeremiah prophesies that it'll be 7 years, which is what? 10 Shemitahs. Oh, well, that's intriguing because then what we have, 70 here, sorry, 10 Shemitahs, because then what we have is proof that they owed 10 Shemitahs. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Torah does not discriminate. Now, here's the important part. This applies to any date connection to catastrophic occurrences or any date connection to things that have happened with Israel. Why Israel? Because they are covenanted people with Yahweh. Regardless of their behavior, they are covenanted with Yahweh. Well, that could become important because the golden calf season contains occurrences, historical, catastrophic occurrences with Israel. Okay? If you Google the golden calf and the Holocaust, it'll tell you that those dates correspond. The destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the destruction of the first temple of Solomon, and the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, golden calf season. Well, there's two very important areas of information that we need to necessarily get ourselves into here. The first is how these reciprocals are negative, but the other reciprocal is positive, okay? We could talk a little bit about that later, but that is proof that there are there are historical correspondences to these Torah-based events. For example, at the Feast of Pentecost, after the ascension of Yeshua, there's a pouring out of the Holy Spirit, right? Well, at the Feast of Pentecost, that hadn't been commanded yet, but was definitely understood by all of the things in the universe, including the zodiac, was when the Israelites arrived at Sinai and were told that they would be a holy people, a royal priesthood, and a holy nation, a royal priesthood, and a peculiar people. Now, that means that we can bank on the idea that there is actually seasonal historical occurrences in time corresponding to the stories in Torah. Well, this particular story in Torah is one that I'm going to read to you here in a minute. But understand, it is exactly the energy that is occurring in those seasons that activates the occurrence that makes it historical. 70 AD corresponds to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD corresponds to the exact dating of the golden calf. The way the rabbis explain it is that Yahweh wants the people of Israel to mourn during the time of the golden calf in order to disavow the energy of the golden calf. So now let's go into some Torah. So I'm going to be going to Exodus chapter 16. I'm going to be reading out of the NLT to begin with, and we'll see if we need to switch it around a little bit. Then the whole community of Israel set out from Elim and journeyed to the wilderness of Sin, or Sinai, and should not be confused with the English word sin, between Elim and Mount Sinai. They arrived there on the 15th day of the second month, 1 month after leaving the land of Egypt. There, too, the whole community of Israel complained about Moses and Aaron. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. But now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. Each day the people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day, they will gather food, and when they prepare it, there will be twice as much as usual." So Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, "By evening you will realize it was Yahweh who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim. In the morning you will see the glory of Yahweh, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us. What have we done that you should complain about us?" Then Moses added, "The Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard your complaints against him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against Yahweh, not against us." Then Moses said to Aaron, announce to the entire community of Israel, present yourselves before Yahweh, for he has heard your complaining. And as Aaron spoke the whole community of Israel, to the whole community of Israel, they looked toward the wilderness, and there they could see an awesome glory of Yahweh in the cloud. Then Yahweh said to Moses, I have heard the Israelites' complaints. Now tell them in the evening you will have meat to eat. In the morning you will have all the bread you want. Then you will know that I am Yahweh. That evening, vast numbers of quail flew in and covered the camp. And the next morning, in the area around the camp was wet with dew. When the dew evaporated, a flaky substance as fine as frost blanketed the ground. The Israelites were puzzled when they saw it. What is it? They asked each other. They had no idea what it was. And Moses told them, it is food Yahweh has given you to eat. These are Yahweh's instructions. Each household should gather as much as it needs. Pick up 2 quarts for each in your tent. So the people of Israel did as they were told. Some gathered a lot, some only a little. But when they measured it out, everyone had just enough. Those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. Each family had just what it needed. Then Moses told them, do not keep any of it until morning. But some of them didn't listen and kept some of it until morning. But by then it was full of maggots and had a terrible smell. Moses was very angry with them. After this, the people gathered the food morning by morning, each family according to its need. And as the sun became hot, the flakes they had not picked up melted and disappeared. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much as usual, 4 quarts, for each person instead of 2. Then all the leaders of the community came and asked Moses for an explanation. He told them, this is what Yahweh commanded. Tomorrow will be a day of complete rest, a holy Shabbat day set apart for Yahweh. So bake or boil as much as you want today and set aside what is left for tomorrow. So they put some aside until morning, just as Moses commanded, and in the morning the leftover food was wholesome and good without maggots or odor. Moses said, eat this food today, for today is the Shabbat, today dedicated to Yahweh, a day dedicated to Yahweh. There will be no food on the ground today. You may gather the food for 6 days, but in the 7th day is the Shabbat. There will be no food on the ground that day. Some of the people went out anyway on the 7th day, but they found no food. Yahweh asked Moses, how long will these people refuse to obey my commands and instructions? They must realize that the Shabbat is Yahweh's gift to you. That is why he gives you a 2-day supply on the 6th day. So there will be enough for 2 days. On the Shabbat, you must each stay in your place. Do not go out to pick up food on the 7th day. So the people did not gather any food on the 7th day. The Israelites called the food manna. It was white like coriander seed, and it tasted like honey wafers. Okay, so now I'm going to illustrate for you the wilderness season in a number of ways. And as I do, it will become very evident that this shift that occurs is special. Okay, all right, here we go. So the first thing that I probably want to do is go ahead and lay out the wedding steps. Let's start by using blue for our wedding steps. You recall there are 3 feasts, right, that are commanded by Yahweh. You know this diagram well. Passover, the cost, tabernacle. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and set some time here. We're going to set time. And time is going to be this line here. So I want you to think about time in order or in context of a rotation of the sun, right? Or I should say a rotation of the earth around the sun and the rotation of the earth. But in our eyes, we see the sun rise and fall. And that's going to become very important here in a minute. So in terms of increments of time, the counting of the Omer is in an increment of 50 days. Not exactly from Passover, though. So let's go ahead and mark out a day segment here as being the beginning of the Omer, and here as being the end of the Omer. We will label this Omer. That is the counting of the days from the first Sabbath after, the first day after the first Sabbath, after the Passover, in the first of the month after barley, after the new moon, after the barley is Aviv. Lots of afters there, but when you get the exact timing down, you are in alignment with heaven. Okay? Now, we're going to drop a line from that point. Let's say we do that color. We're going to drop a line from that point down as what we call the median, or day 25. Okay? And then I'm going to add a sine wave here. Oops, that's not right. I'm going to add a sine wave here that corresponds to that median. Okay? Then I'm going to draw a line underneath that median. Let's see if we can get it with a dark blue on this screen. Cross here. Okay? And we're going to call this low. Okay? Now I think I'm going to go ahead and move this word Omer over a little bit because I need room. And I'm going to go ahead and finish the line going downward, going upward. And I'm going to create another arc. We'll say we're going to put this arc in, let's put it in magenta. That goes from here. Whoops, that's the wrong pen. I'll get my pen steady someday. Thank you for letting me be valuable in front of you. Okay, so now we have the median day 25, and we have this huge purple line arcing above this thing and a green line arcing below it, and we call the lower crest the low, and we're going to call the upper crest you know what, let's do that in the same, let's do the same thing up here. Let's do it in this color. High. Okay. Now, we come to a very interesting moment in all of this, and that is that as there is a, let's see, let's use red to indicate this decline. Okay, there is a decline in satiety. Let me describe satiety just for a moment. So here's how the mechanisms work. When you are hungry, there is a little hormone that triggers that causes your stomach to contract. And when your stomach contracts, you feel hunger pangs, okay? Also, you begin to salivate as if your mouth is saying, hey, there's supposed to be food here that I can break down, right? Well, the next thing that happens is the body goes into a really strange little panic, which kind of is more like a temper tantrum than it is a panic. You start to get headaches. There's no headache, okay? It's a somatic reaction. It's basically your body saying, we need to tell you something to get your attention because you're not doing what you need to do here. So it triggers a headache. It triggers lactic acid in your legs, which creates cramps. It triggers other processes in your body. As your body begins to throw a fit because it's not getting food, hunger occurs. And that's what we experience it as, irritability. And so what we really experience is the symptoms of hunger instead of the root of hunger, which is the emptiness of the stomach, obviously. Okay, and the timing also. We get very biorhythmic in our feeding schedule. But in that process, us humans call that hangry. Well, then all of a sudden we begin to consume food, and your body's elements, the belly, the pancreas, the kidneys, the liver, the immune system, spleen, right? The heart even can only handle so much capacity of process. And so there's a point in time where as your belly starts to fill up, an enzyme is released, and that enzyme that's released triggers a hormone that tells your brain to reward you for satisfying you. So satiety is the concept of getting full and the bliss of being full. It's that point in time where you're eating and eating, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, push the plate away, right? We're going to pick at it now. We're going to take little nibbles because it's still delightful, right? It's still enjoyable as a food. Otherwise, you wouldn't eat it. We nibble, nibble, nibble. But the truth is we've become satisfied. Now, here is the intrigue. The wilderness season does not grant satiety. So you can consume and you can become full, but you never get the reward, okay? And that can potentially come out as hunger, as actual desire for food, which of course occurs here in the wilderness. Because why? Well, we know they had food. We know they had cattle, right? We know that they had lamb. They had a way to prepare it. They had fire. How do we know that? Because there's commandments about fire in the Torah, right? We know they had those things. Now, there is a concept of consuming your inventory because that is also their livelihood, their assets. But truth be told, they had food. So why all of a sudden were they feeling this way? Well, it's that concept of lack of satiety. You eat, but you're not satisfied. Well, interestingly enough, the concept of satiety being something that you would expect to be entitled to as a human being, that you're going to get full when you eat, doesn't actually exist during the time of the wilderness season. He brings them out into the wilderness and gives them an insatiable desire to consume without any opportunity to feel satisfied. So what they were really asking Moses is, when are we going to be satisfied? Now I bring across an important side point that I want to just point out so you get a little bit of a rabbi's nugget. And that is that I want you to see that there is actually a concept here where the Israelites said, we sat around flesh pots and ate meat and vegetables. Okay. Two very important points to bring forward. Number one, when Moses goes before Pharaoh and says, hey, will you let my people go? And Pharaoh says, not only will I not let your people go, but you also need to know that since you are being idle, you can now go make your own brick by gathering your own straw. Well, I don't need to get into all the supernatural ramifications of what happened there, but I can tell you that the proof of the fact that there was not actually a physical labor that was going on, but instead a loyalty to Pharaoh as a military entity. Here's some of the proof. We sat around flesh pots eating and consuming vegetables. They had time, right? Doesn't sound like a forced labor people, especially if we reference American slavery, where slaves were lucky to eat. And the only reason they were fed was to keep them alive so that they could work. And truth be told, is that depending on conditions, that didn't last very long. But let's say we had conditions by which somebody was had an understanding of human nutrition, they're still not getting flesh pots and leeks, right? Okay. Now you understand it wasn't necessarily about food, but it was about the satisfaction of food. So now we have something very interesting happen. Let's go back to the board real quick. And I wish I had a pointer, but I'm just gonna draw on the board some more to show you this. And let's say that we use, I'm just going to use my finger and I'm just going to use purple for now to illustrate. So the premise is that when we come to the median, okay, we are coming to this point in the decline of satiety. And what I mean by that is that all of this time right here is contained in an insatiable contractive energy. And the design behind it is answered in Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3. Deuteronomy chapter 8, not. Yes, he humbled you by letting you go hungry, then feeding you with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. He did it to teach you that people do not live by bread alone. Rather, we live by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. Now, there are two very important imperative points that need to come forward in this. First of all, he did it to show that you can't live on bread alone. What does that mean? That means your nutrition consuming is not guaranteed. You can consume something, but if you're not satisfied, it's irrelevant. Because man is only satisfied by the provision, protection, and instruction of the intensification of all power in the universe, and that's it. You think you work 40 hours a week to produce a paycheck? No. You work 40 hours a week to do work for 6 days, and then the seventh you shall rest. But that paycheck comes from the intensification of all power in the universe and is unmerited. You didn't earn it. You're not entitled to it. I know that sounds absolutely insane, and to me, sometimes it is. But if you get your head wrapped around where things come from, the origin of things, you begin to understand this better. You begin to understand the tent as a vessel, as an Elohim. You begin to understand provision, protection, instruction as energies, constructs that are presented to you in such a way that you could understand them. Okay, so one more time, I just want you to look at this one more time. Yes, he humbled you by letting you go hungry and then feeding you with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. Okay, so now we need to look at one more principle here. And that is that when you hit this all-time low here, okay, you actually are at that moment when they said, God brought us out here to die. What does that mean? That means on the 25th day of Omer is going to be your worst day. And in that process, your worst day is going to contain your best day. Fun times, right? So your most spiritually blissful day is also your most difficult day in satisfaction. Recently, in a dining experience in a very, very nice restaurant where they know how to make flavors manipulate your brain, I had a person who I witnessed saying, you know, I'm starting to get full, but this tastes so good. I don't want to get full. And interestingly enough, then they said, I have never had ordinary food happen like this when I get full. When I get full and I have ordinary food, there's nothing to it. But this stuff is so yummy, I don't want to get full. Well, that person at that time had no idea that the reason why they said that is because they are spiritually elite in their understanding. They don't understand that the experience they were having was the high of that day. Because truth be told is, as the suffering occurs, the spiritual high occurs, causing you to have a blissful experience during the suffering. Now, I know that that sounds extremely Buddhist in nature, and it is. But the premise is that the transcendence is proof of a bigger picture with a bigger understanding, which explains why Yeshua is able, through the temptation of himself. Remember, the tempter. Let's recap for just a moment. James says you are led away of your own lusts. And if you're led away of your own lusts, then that means what? That means that you actually are the one being tempted by your own desires or deficits. We are led away. Led away from what? From whatever the path is that those answers are contained. The path contains the answers, and we choose to look a different direction for the answer. Okay? So Yeshua is able to overcome the temptation to change the loaves into bread. And remember, I taught that when it says, if you be the Son of God, is his doubt, because that is also a temptation he had to have. He had to doubt, like Adam, who consumed the fruit. But remember, he was in all ways tempted, but did not sin, which means he never violated Torah. So him changing those rocks into bread would have been a violation of Torah. I won't get into the why of that, but just rest assured that all sin rests upon the shoulders of Torah. And so if it was a sin to change the loaves into bread, he rebukes the tempter. Who's the tempter? His own mind, right? His own mind is tempting him to change the loaves into bread because why? He's hungry. Deuteronomy 8. Yes, he humbled you by letting you go hungry and then feeding you with manna, a food previously unknown to you and your ancestors. He did it to teach you that people do not live by bread alone, rather than we live by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. What does he say? He says, no, For it is written, "You shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of Yahweh." He responds with this particular scripture, which means what? Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 3 is the core of the temptation of Yeshua in Matthew chapter 4. Okay. Now, here's what you need to know. The moment that the Israelites say, "Give us food to eat, lest we die here in the wilderness," corresponds to this point. What I want you to notice is what happens immediately, okay? After that, they say, "Tomorrow you will have food." So let's illustrate this in a very golden way, because that's like the icing on the cake, so to speak. And let's use this one color here, and we'll just go with this right here as a satiety. Very sparkly and golden. In fact, maybe let's put some finer highlights in here and get artistic so that we can see how shiny it really actually is. Okay. And so the premise is then that becomes the moment of answer. Answer to the original question: how may I be satisfied? Now, I want you to realize we still have, and this is important, we still have an entire journey of upswing here. Okay? So we could call this one downswing or downtrend, eventually arriving at this point. And that same intersection begins the uptrend. Okay? We have a downtrend and an uptrend. So this same intersection is not only the climax of the downtrend, but it is the inception of the uptrend. So this is what I want you to think about. A shift from this down, lack of satiety to a moment of difference in satiety, not necessarily all of the satisfaction, because all the satisfaction comes from the moment of Pentecost. Why? What has been the great anxiety here? Truth, and this is powerful. What has been the great anxiety? Let's see, we're going to put this in, let's label these in yellow with fat pen. So Passover is the Shidduchim, right? Pentecost is the Erusin, and Tabernacles is the Nezusin, or Nisusin, sorry. Nisusin. You say, what are those, Rabbi? Well, those are the matchmaking. The betrothal. Oh, look at that big old fat one that I didn't write. The betrothal. And the ratification. Why? Is there a hunger in the wilderness season. What is the satiety that is actually being sought? The cosmic satiety. Well, what I want you to think about is that vessel that was the result of Yahweh's, let's go back a little bit bigger than Yahweh, the intensification of all power in the universe's desire to bestow all that he could possibly bestow of all that he had upon a vessel. And that vessel would be empty and have a desire, but he had a rule that it had to choose him through free will. In other words, it had to say, I am making a choice to receive all that you desire to bestow upon me by my own choice and not your sovereignty. And so then this vessel becomes what? The bride. Right? And so now you understand why the wilderness season exists. It is her desire to become joined to a husband. At Passover, all of the single women dance in front of all of the eligible men in order to produce desire. And I don't need to describe to you what kind of desire. The dancing isn't necessarily about personality unless you can do something with your eyes, right? And so you draw the gaze of an eligible bachelor. He goes to the matchmaker. Well, he goes to his father, and his father goes to the matchmaker and says, make this happen. This is the one. Or his father says, nope, that's not the one. I have a different one for you, or in mind, right? But let's say it works out. They go to the matchmaker. Now the woman who danced, who does not know that anybody even got their gaze drawn. That's what you need to realize. The bride does not know that she's drawn the gaze of the groom until the shadchan comes along, until the matchmaker comes along. And when the matchmaker comes along, a deal is proposed between the bridegroom's father and the bride's father, and those two are offered an opportunity to converge and discuss. I mean, the fathers. And what happens is eventually there's a moment when the bridegroom comes forward with I wills. I will do this, you will be this to me. I will do this, you will be this to me. Every I will corresponds to what she will be to him. All she has to do, she doesn't make any vows. All she has to do is to be those to him and drink the cup. Now, there are two very important elements here then. That is that until the bride knows that she is going to be betrothed and is being given an opportunity to drink the cup, she stays in a state of desire for a groom. Or she stays hungry, and that is not satisfied until Pentecost. That is not satisfied until the betrothal. In fact, she doesn't even know if anything's going to happen until the betrothal. There might be whisperings, but in the end, there's no true conscious understanding that that's what's going on. Okay. So what does that mean? That means that this downward trend is about desire to be the bride. In the end, that's the actual energy that's behind this. The satisfying or the feeding at the exact day after the median, so day 26 of the counting of Omer, you will feel a shift. All of a sudden, that which should have satisfied you during the days of satiety all of a sudden seem irrelevant. Because why? Because the manna has come. And what is the manna? The manna is satiety. All of a sudden, the hungers are being satisfied again. It doesn't mean that some miracle of not being hungry has occurred. It means that now satisfaction can once again be applied. Now, there's a few reasons why this is important. Number one, if satiety does not come during the time when you are trying to fulfill your hungers, then you are going to become more and more obsessed with that hunger. Now, furthermore, you're going to find that after day 26, it'll be a one shot, one kill satisfaction. No matter what the hunger is, even if it is inappropriate hungers, they'll be satisfied. But during this time, this downtrend, you will go crazy, desiring things, desiring things for your body, desiring things to satisfy your mind, desiring things to satisfy the physical deficits around you, justice, social ridicule, etc. No satisfaction. But then at Pentecost, all of that comes to a close. However, it is also important to know that something happens here as well. And that is the complete opposite. If we're in a constant uptrend, let me go ahead and go to the board for this. If we're in a constant uptrend of satisfaction in the supernatural, we have all kinds of revelation, learning, teachings, etc., that just flow. And it feels like you're on a cloud. Yeah, life may be horrible at the moment, but there's just something about all this stuff you're learning. And it could be as simple as profound meditations for the simplest of people who are not masters of the esoteric, but instead are just simple people. Say a man in his normal life, living his doing his normal things, realizes that there's a bigger picture. That's an example of this. Okay? Now, the next thing that we need to think about is this here. Why is this occurring? Well, if you've been following the Omer, you know that one of the things I've said is that if you were to continue to go up, you're going to Elijah this thing, right? You're going to hop in the chariot, gone, no more cue on the earth to pick on people's minds, right? Some of you say yay to that. So the premise is that there needs to be a decline. Now, that decline is going to be something very intriguing. That decline is actually going to be a supernatural insatiety. Will become insatiable. You will obsess for the knowledge and the experience that you were getting at the beginning of the Omer. Day 26 marks the beginning of a hunger pain in your soul. A hunger pain that actually doesn't get answered again until next Omer. However, it has its moments of happiness, if you will. There's an incline during tabernacles, but the actual special stuff of the wilderness season doesn't exist. Because why? Because there's never a time again where the earth is so thirsty that it would bring about a flood, except during the counting of the Omer. Oh, you didn't know that the flood happened during the counting of the Omer? Yes, the flood began during the counting of the Omer. So now when we get to the other side of this thing, we understand that that's why there is some semblance of it during the fall feasts. A special moment during tabernacles when, once again, the Torah becomes flesh and dwells among us and tabernacles with us specifically. Meaning what? There is a time in which there is a moment of satisfaction to that supernatural desire for supernatural rain. Now we understand a little bit more of the dynamics of the water ceremony, and we understand more of the dynamics of the latter rain, or the early rains. Okay, so now what we need to do is discuss the concept of the energies that are involved here. Now, I know that in the past, there has been a thought process in your head that a painful experience invokes a sense of belief that something evil is present. So the way that I'm going to illustrate this is through the birthing of a child. Anybody who is given birth to a child would agree with me that it hurts and is painful and uncomfortable and can incite, under the right circumstances, feelings of asking, why did you make this choice, or why is God letting this happen? The truth is the result is not something bad, is it? Is there ever a place in the hearts of humans where we could identify that a newborn baby is malevolent and is the result of an action of evil against us? No. But the contractions and the contractive energy that produces the child is not comfortable. Which means what? We can have discomfort without it becoming evil. Well, this makes sense, right? Because what do we know about the word evil? We know that it is a combination of the drawing of a human head and a twisted rope that indicates a twisted head. And interestingly enough, the drawing of the human head is in the right side or precedence, and therefore is augmenting the rope, which means what? We're twisting our own heads. But that's not for this talk today. But what you need to understand is that a misapplication of logic and rationale to a circumstance is evil. In other words, evil is actually a perception brought on by some form of discomfort. Now, that we have distinguished evil from contraction, we can also identify that balance and expansion are both very different animals, and all are different from each. For example, it says, in fact, let me go read that. We'll read that. I'm thinking we'll read it out of the King James. It's going to be Ezekiel chapter 45, verse 7. I'm sorry. Ezekiel 47. Okay, scratch that. Isaiah 45:7. Okay, here we go. So, oops. So I create the light and make the darkness. I send the good times and the bad times. I, Yahweh, am the one who does these things. We're going to switch that over to King James. Then we get, I form the light, create darkness. I make peace, create evil. I, Yahweh, do all these things. Which means what? The light is also part of this discussion. So we have expansion, balance, and contraction as the light. Now, contractive light is hard for us humans to understand because almost everything around us is expansive. We grow outward, right? Everything grows outward. Even things that are created that we use are the result of some sort of extrusion process, like plastics, or some sort of expansion process of heat, like forging. Now, what's important for you to understand about this is the concept that if there is an expansion, contraction, and balance as not being evil, all three of those things can appear to be evil because of their attributes attached to them. So the way that I want you to think about this is that discomfort does not equate to evil, but your response to discomfort may possibly create the perception and therefore the reality of evil. And furthermore, that not seeing the light in something that is the light is evil, because it's what? It's a twisted mind. It's a type of person who looks at things wrongly. Okay? All right. Now, it is important for you to understand that the reason why these things are this way is because of the fact that part of choosing to receive all things that we could capacitively receive, because we can't handle everything, right? Think about this. When you first began your journey in Christianity or in spiritualism or perhaps in atheism, what you have learned since you began is more, no matter what, no matter what. One of the reasons that this is true is because of the storage of information and how it is stored. Because learnings are designed to be retrieved from memory and returned to present time processing in order to influence new decisions. So how you perceive something and expect it is how it might come as a reality, differentiated by what it actually was supposed to be. That can be very powerful. There's this concept of possibly missing the mark or missing the boat. But here is my biggest context of this situation. The Israelites are out in the wilderness and they say, God brought us out into the wilderness to die, right? Moses and Aaron do something very interesting here. They say, so they complain to Moses and Aaron and say, you brought us out here. So I want you to think about the low level vibrations that are occurring in those humans, okay? The low-level vibrations are, they have no idea what is about to happen to them at Pentecost. They don't understand that the moment they come under the covering of Yahweh, he becomes zealous for them in such a way that I would hate to be on the receiving end of the whooping that would happen if they messed with Israel. Okay? Secondly, it is important to understand that he desires and wants Israel to participate in his covenantal process. What were they supposed to do? They were supposed to take Torah to the world. Why was there a great divorce and a great marriage? Or why was there a great marriage, a great divorce, a death, and then a resurrection of the husband so that the woman was released from the law of adultery? Because she went into the nations without Torah, but now all would be drawn to Yeshua. And the reason is because of the heart pumping action of the push pull of the cosmic energies in such a way that all souls would be drawn to the meritlessness of he made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. And then God turns around, pushes the Israelites out into the wilderness from Egypt without merit. He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. That's the lamb, the innocent lamb that has nothing to do with the death of the firstborn, taking the place of the firstborn by there being blood on the doorposts. The angel is satisfied and moves to the next house and kills. And then we have the concept that as we get into the wilderness, Yahweh makes an announcement. You will give me a certain amount of money in order to redeem yourselves because I bought you from Egypt. Man, if we could get our heads wrapped around that, I don't even know how to explain it to you, but if you could really grasp that what he's saying here is, I gave it to you, now earn it. You would understand why Torah has not been done away with and why Torah is a merited factor in your life, why you have calamity and why you have certain things happen, because we reap what we sow. Started as a free gift. It's powerful. The concept is powerful. So we have these very low vibration people coming to Moses, who are both, and Aaron, who are both masters. How do we know? They control a lot of the elements already, right? Every aspect of the things that happen in Egypt happen as a result of Moses' will. And we'll get deeper into that someday, but the context or the concept is that he was granted sovereignty as a god over Pharaoh, which means that whatever power Pharaoh had, Moses had more. Whatever sun shining on the unjust that Pharaoh had, Moses had more. In fact, Moses could decide whether he had the sunshine or not. And Aaron was his prophet, which means what? Aaron was his spokesperson. Aaron was the one who would connect the people to the God. So these are masters, right? These are not ordinary people. Moses and Aaron are after the order of Melchizedek, which is a royal priesthood, which means their line, right? Their soul line is actually heavenly royal. Okay, so now the premise is that these low vibration people come to these high vibration people, and what happens? These high vibration people receive this energy sent out towards them, right? And what is this? What is this energy? This energy is malevolence. This energy is evil. How do we know? Because of the twisted minds of the statement, it was better in Egypt. Well, if it was so much better in Egypt, why did you cry out? And if it was so much better in Egypt, Why did you walk out of it? That begs the question, doesn't it? So the next thing that we need to ask then, and this is an important one, is how is it that a master is to respond to a weak mind, a twisted mind, a misperceptioned mind? Oh, we could learn so much from Moses and Aaron right here. What do? They say, I'm going to receive your energy and I'm going to push it back upon you and say, I didn't bring you out here. And it's not me you're actually talking crap to. Well, if that didn't put the fear of God in the people, I don't know what will, but it didn't, right? There still had to be a response, and the response was the manna. We'll get to that. But literally what happened is that Moses says, it's not me you're complaining to, so stop pretending like that's what's going on. You know, there's a lot that could happen with a human being if they just stopped blaming everybody else and started blaming God. In fact, there is a concept in Kabbalah called seeing the light, which is basically where you realize that all things that are in front of you, good or evil, in your mind, are actually from the Father of lights. Because if we combine Romans chapter 8, verse 28, I believe it is. Let's take a look here real quick. I don't want to misquote this. I want you to be able to go look at these up or later on or whatever. Whenever you're watching this, of course. Yeah, Romans chapter 8, verse 28. We know that all things work together, conspire together, right? Let me read the Amplified Version. Let's see how wonderful that thing gets embellished. Amplified. Where is that? Where did it go? One moment while I pull my study self together. Okay, looking in the Amplified. Still not there, that's strange. Oh, it's still coming, okay. So anyways, all things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. That's Romans chapter 8, verses 28 in the New King James Version. And then jumping over to James, it says, all good things come down from the Father of lights. Then we conclude that all things are actually the light. But our brains and minds twist that information to become darkness and thereby create an identity problem within us. Okay? Now, there are a few important pieces of information that we need to tap into. The first one, and this is very relevant, is the fact that perception plays a huge role here. The second is that the response that Moses actually gives to the Israelites is, all of this is light. So what you need to do is respond to the light correctly. What is the light telling you? Is it expansive light, contractive light, or balanced light? If it's expansive, it can be one of two things, either an expansion of an other, right? In other words, that we cause the expansion of another person, the expansion of self, where we emanate as the intensification of all power in the universe, right? Or an expansion of circumstances by which both benefit. So one is the other, one is self, and one is both. And I can tell you that's the voice of Yeshua or Messiah within us that would cause it to be both. Okay? Next is if it's balanced. If it's balanced, most likely you are trying to expand, but the universe is trying to get you to contract and then give. Okay. Or you are trying to contract and the universe is trying to give to you so that you can expand. Okay. If it's contractive, then you are overindulgent and something is trying to draw that energy back so that you can step back into balance. If it is contractive with the other, then that is where the wealth of the wicked is stored up for the righteous, right? That's the concept of all of the things that are being done for malevolent purposes is actually the light and is designed for you, the warrior of the light. Now, in all of those processes, it is important to understand that that's the light working upon you in discomfort. If you are sitting in a state of satiety, then you will not desire the light, and therefore you will not experience the light, which is why this has to be gradual. Now, what you don't realize is what's going to happen during the golden calf season is the complete opposite of everything I just talked about. Now, where this becomes important is to start to realize that if these low vibration entities, these twisted minds, go to Moses and pretend. Now, here's the part that's so important. You have no idea how much you actually pretend, how much you pretend to be angry or sad or reactive to a circumstance. Because the higher vibration you are actually at, there is a concept that as you are vibrating at that, if you begin to try to use the normal concepts of the system below, then you will fall in vibration. What do I mean by that? Well, what about the times when you have gotten angry or frustrated or felt justified in being reactive to a cause that was not your own and you didn't have any business being a part of? What about a time when you have become reactive to something you know you've healed from, and yet all of a sudden you find yourself in that state again? Those are all fake. If you've healed from something, it's not there anymore. And if it's not there anymore, what are you doing in that state? Well, these false personas need to be addressed the way in which they need to be addressed. You are an Elohim, in the English, God, right? You are an Elohim. What is an Elohim? An Elohim is a vessel of reception that has within it the seed of light that is constantly expanding and becoming more and more authoritative, more and more powerful, and more connected to the corporate collective conscience of what truly is the covenanted people. The corporate collective consciousness above, who's already arrived, that being Elijah and all of them, and the corporate collective consciousness of those who are here in this place, and best yet, the corporate collective conscience that is under the earth, which is those who still have twisted minds but have maximum potential for being a part of this. They show the symptoms of mastery, and yet they're struggling. Okay. I have a few in my congregation who show those symptoms and are struggling to achieve mastery over their twisted minds. Okay. So these low vibration people go to these masters. What do these masters do? They take the veil off. They say, it is not us who you actually are having a problem with, because we didn't actually lead you out into this wilderness. You followed us because that's what you do. You're sheep. and you don't understand the leadership in your capacity. But since you did follow us, you need to know we followed it. What? The cloud, right? And where do they see this massive intensification that kind of says, yeah, they're right, in the cloud, right? So it's interesting because now we have this concept that a master will receive the energy of the lower worlds, receive the energy of the twisted minds, and remove the veil. Oh, it is not me you have a problem with. In fact, I am probably the mirror of what you hate within yourself because you have yet to identify yourself as an Elohim, and you have yet to identify yourself as unmeritedly righteous. And so begins the journey. Meaning what? What does the wisdom of the wilderness season? I could tell you, I have 3 congregation members, one who has ran away and gone to be sheep with somebody else, and 2 who have stayed but still make the same statement. What's the point of knowing this? Maybe now that answer is available, and that is knowing this means you can have mastery response over the twisted mind. Because where does that begin? That begins in your nutshell. That begins in your brain. That begins with your wounds, entitlements, and limiting beliefs. I want you to think about this. You feel entitled to be reactive to a circumstance that's uncomfortable in such a way and pretend and identify that it's evil when really you know that it is actually part of the process, and really you know that it's actually the intensification of all power in the universe raining light down upon you, and yet you still feel justified to sin, to act out, to be spoiled, and to be and to throw fits because you believe that it's okay to, because of the discomfort you're experiencing. Now, if that doesn't sound bad, there's actually something worse. And that is when you believe something that is lower than you, because this is what I want you to think about, okay? Let's talk about trauma for a minute. Let's get real for a minute with trauma. So trauma is actually your mind believing information that is being communicated from another person who is actually technically lower in vibration than you. Let me prove it to you. If you are, let's say that we use a victim of robbery, okay? The victim of robbery has an item in their possession that the person wants to take away from that person. So the person comes in is by force, coercion, or manipulation, takes that item from that person. Now that person has become a victim of robbery. So what's the trauma? The trauma is obviously going to be the who, the what, the where, the why, the how, in some way triggered by another who, what, why, how, and where that has nothing to do with the trauma. The person took your stuff and is gone. But another person comes along, has the same personality. That's the who. Another circumstance comes along, and that's the how. Another object similar to what was taken comes along. That's the what, right? Another method by which they could be robbed again comes along. That's the why. Or maybe that would go more into the how. But the premise is that all of those, the who, the what, the why, the where, oh yeah, location. You come to a location similar to that location. Those memories are going to trigger. That's trauma. Now watch this. You who held the object were vibrating at a frequency sufficient to be a steward of that object. Because nothing comes down from heaven without trust. The person who comes to steal the object is not willing to trust and therefore is not trusted to have the object and covets the object and removes it from you, who is the lower frequency. So now here you are listening to the opinion of a lower frequency, right? So now we'll get back to general trauma. General trauma means somehow harm has come to our physical body, our emotional state, and our mental state, right? Harm has come to that, or to someone who we value, or to property that we value. Okay, that's trauma. Triggers are memory context sensitive items that return us to that same emotional state, physical state, physiological state, like hormones that are being triggered, like adrenaline and whatnot, even though that person is not present anymore. But what they said when they did the thing was, you are not worthy of protection. You are not worthy. You're not worthy of provision. Why? Because they took the thing, right? That you don't deserve to have knowledge. What knowledge? He made him who knew no sin to become sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God. We are not in the state of title of sinner. We are in the state of the title of righteousness. Meaning what? That person lied. That person lied through their actions, but here's the crazy part. We believed it, therefore that's a wound. So construct of a wound is your fault. It's your choice to continue to believe the lies of somebody. Now, don't get me wrong. That is a very painful, in fact, excruciatingly, mentally distressing process. Don't think that I talk of these things simply. I talk of these things cosmically. Okay? You have no idea the level of suffering that I myself have even gone through in my life that has shaped my brain into the wounds that I have. It is not an easy task to not believe the offender. It is not an easy task to not believe the weaker mind, the twisted mind, the twisted rope in the human head. But I can tell you that when we do believe it, we walk in it, because it's not what happens to you, it's what you do about it that makes a difference. And what you will do will be based upon what you believe about yourself, because it's not what you do that makes you who you are. You don't steal and then you're a thief. You think you're a thief and you steal. Because you are the righteousness of God. That's the identity you need to understand and maintain, and that's the identity you need to grasp a hold of. So we come to an interesting concept, don't we? We come to a concept that Moses did not have wounds by which he would buy into the garbage that they were bringing. They were going and saying, you brought us out here in the wilderness to die. Nah, I just followed the cloud, dude. I don't know what your problem is. Why don't you go talk to the cloud? Because I was just following the cloud. You followed me because you're a sheeple. You don't understand leadership yet. And then I get that. And truthfully, you probably have the potential, but you're acting like an absolute idiot right now. So go talk to the cloud, because I didn't do it. And I'm not owning that. I'm not taking that. I am not taking this accusation that I brought you out into the wilderness to die. If you're going to die, go die. But it's not my fault. Okay? So that's the premise, right? These masters respond to this energy that comes at them, this contractive energy that comes at them, and say, hey, whoa, 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 whoa. I got this cloud thing going on over here. You're not going to distract me from that. Right? Okay. Oh, but there's a worse one, isn't there? There's the worst of the worst. And that's the limiting beliefs. Wounds are bad. They are. Wounded people wound people. But I'm going to tell you a worse person than that person who wounds. And I'm going to tell you a worse person than that person who is wounded and believes the lies of the person who wounds. And that's the person who doubts. And that's the person who does not believe that they can accomplish either what they've been told to accomplish or what they dream of accomplishing. Oh man, why is that person worse? Because they will reject the light, not based upon desert, like the entitled person, not based upon believing a lie, but through this simple act of self-loathing, the simple act of despising the self that you see in the mirror. What is the Omer? What is the Omer? I want you to think about this. We go through 40 days of introspection, 3 weeks after the golden calf. The 40 days of introspection occur. 40 days of trying to figure out all the stuff so that on that 40th day, when we arrive at Yom Kippur, we can beat our chests, get it out of our system, have it come back as a temptation, come back as a reward, or come back as yet another failure. And what I mean by that is that as we go into Yom Kippur repentant, we need to identify that those moments of repentance are not identified as truth yet until you are tempted again, and that is when you have overcome, and then the reward comes. So you need to realize that the process behind the introspection is different than the Omer. I taught a whole message on this, but I want you to get it. The process of Omer is looking in the mirror and seeing the intensification of all power in the universe shining so brightly back at you, you can't even look in the mirror. A realization that you are who you are because of who he is, because that is him in you being uniquely processed. You want to know God? Go talk to the next person in front of you, because that's his fingerprint. You want to understand the uniqueness of him, you watch another human. You speak and interact with that other human, because that they are divine. And they are supposed to do the same with you. And better yet, when you stand in front of that mirror, you see the intensification of all power in the universe staring you in the eyes. This is not an easy concept for Christians. Christians throw fits when I have this talk with them, because they're taught that they're not gods, even though that Yeshua said they are in John chapter 10. And, oh wait, David said it too, and David is an ascended ruler. You need to know that David is ruling heaven and earth until the end of time through Yeshua. Yeah, I won't let you try to figure out that one right now. But I can tell you, it says in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 15, or maybe down from 15, but in that area about the two sticks being joined together, the final part of that is that David would rule over them. Well, we know that's through the bloodline or the DNA of Messiah. Okay. So now there is another part that we need to get our minds wrapped around, and that is that we need to accept that limiting beliefs is the worst thing that exists in this world, because a wound will deny the light because of its anguish about the darkness. An entitled person will deny the light because it believes it's the light. But a limited person will have the knowledge of the light, know how to receive it, and choose not to. And that creates a malevolent being. Because if you deny the light, then you must be the darkness. Limiting beliefs are powerful. Doubt is powerful. And here's the crazy part about it. There's an integration into entitlement and wounds from limiting beliefs. Of course there is, right? You have a person who's wounded, who what? Believed the lie of somebody who did something against them. They believed that lie. They believed that they weren't good, they weren't worthy, or they were only worthy of this thing, or were only useful for this thing if they've been used, which is a big part of trauma. So there is information being communicated from the wound to the limiting belief, where the limiting belief says, oh no, I'm only good for sex, or oh no, I'm only good as a maintenance man. I could never run businesses. We could see that, right? We could see where somebody who is told their whole life they'll never amount to anything, then they're probably not going to be part of the 1%, right? But something you need to get into your head is that's all you, and that's all your information, and that's all your lies. Moses and Aaron didn't tell you that you could not do this thing. Moses and Aaron were following the cloud. So don't think anybody caused your limiting beliefs. Your darkness causes your limiting beliefs. Remember the teaching that I gave about the threshold and the slingshot? So the idea is that we will realize that we actually do have the potential to be something, to overcome something, to change. And we'll say, I want to do that. And all of a sudden, a trial will come, a drama will come, a thing, a discomfort will come and say, you sure? Because here's how you have dealt with this in the past. Would you like to do something different? You overcome it and boom, you're slingshotted into your next season. In fact, a threshold is evidence that the next season is coming. In fact, the notion that you could do it is going to result in a threshold, which is going to be very uncomfortable. You make it through that threshold to the other side, and then boom, all of a sudden, you have this thing, right? Okay. So now the next context or concept that you need to understand is that a limiting belief is actually a future action. An entitlement is a present action, and a wound is a past action. So let's talk about this for a minute. What is the power behind the limiting belief? It is a fear that it's true, which causes us to what? Become angry, reactive, expulse energy in an expansive manner that is actually the dark side of the energy that is trying to tell you to strike out, to move out into that risk and step out into that faith and step out into that entrepreneurship or that business idea or some other beautiful thing that is going to create such another expansive energy within the universe that it will affect all mankind. Because the sky's the limit on how much you can affect once you overcome your limiting beliefs. You want proof? Joshua, Caleb. What did Joshua and Caleb prove? You just had to believe you could do it. Did they have to go through the mess with the rest of the Israelites? Yeah, I think so, for a number of reasons. I think the reason why Joshua had to go through the 40 years with the Israelites is because he was going to lead them, and therefore he had to develop a relationship with the lower frequencies, and had to be demonstrated to the people that he was actually the one for the job. Because remember, a people will only be loyal to the leader who appears to be the leader. Joshua was a warrior. The people needed to see it. What was the first commandment after Baal Peor? Go and destroy the Midianites. And who died in that battle? Baal, right? Remember Baal, or Baalam, sorry, not Baal. Baalam was the guy who had the donkey, right? And the donkey kept going to the side of the road and he's beating it, and all of a sudden the donkey speaks and says, all these years I have been loyal to you. Why do you beat me now? And of course, Balaam just talks to the donkey like it's the thing to do and says, because you keep turning aside. And then all of a sudden he sees the angel of the Lord, and The point being, there was a massive, decisive context behind the battle of Midian. It was to show that Yahweh was not going to tolerate these infestations in his camp. It was to show that Yahweh was not going to tolerate somebody teaching other nations how to cause the Israelites to fall. And it was a concept of showing that the people were going to follow Joshua in the battle. So I believe that the 40 years with Joshua was about developing a relationship with the new generation. So when we are working with the concept of the wilderness season, we realize that satiety has its place in that day after the median of the counting of Omer. You need to understand there's still an upswing, which means there will still be hunger, strong ones that will reduce, but they're going to be very strong here. In fact, interestingly enough, the next days, so we have day 25, right? And the next 15 days leading up to the 40th day, which is a very significant day, will be a lot of hungers, but they will be satisfied. So you'll get ravenous, and all of a sudden the manna will fall. Because you need to learn how to receive the light still. You need to realize there's a context here of not receiving, and there's a context of receiving but not being satisfied, and there's a context of being satisfied and receiving. So you're now going to learn to receive, be satisfied. It's not going to be as horrible as that Deuteronomy 8:3 scripture. And slowly but surely, we're going to move towards the joy of Pentecost, which was a powerful, powerful thing. Okay, so now what we need to understand is that if that's true, one of the things that's going to get us through the wilderness season is responding correctly, because that's what shows that you're a master, someone who has overcome, someone who has understanding of these things. I propose to you that anybody who's really been watching my stuff is only going to be limited in this by their limiting beliefs, which is dangerous, because that means that they've healed from their wounds, have released their entitlements, and now are just stuck in this future self that they just can't see. Well, it is time to see that. The energy that will be coming from this point right here, this shiny, flashy point, is all about elevation. That energy is trying to get you to look in the mirror and see the entrepreneur, see the successful person, because I'm going to just tell you something that's going to blow your mind. I've always said, in what capacity you were able to be evil, you are able to be good. You need to realize that you are enabled by God to both of those ends. You can either be the malevolent being that you choose to be and are enabled in it, or you can be the benevolent being and you can be enabled in it. But choosing not to receive the light will result in malevolence, because you are a vessel that can be filled by either one. You need to realize if you choose not to receive the light, then you will be operating within malevolence and therefore have a twisted mind. And now we come back to low vibrations versus high vibrations, and we come back to the concept that you reject the light, then you're the problem. You're not the change that this world needs. And I propose to you that you actually are the reason why I have a ministry. You're the reason why I want a ministry that will say they are the change that this world needs, because of you being the problem. I don't think that's what you want to be. I don't think anybody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I'm going to be the dominant dictatorship, ruler, tyranny of the world. But I can tell you, if you reject the light because you think you can't do it, you are lying because you've been told you can. Where? When you were instructed to. When were you instructed to? When you received the dream in the first place. When you received the inspiration in the first place, you were instructed. And if you were instructed by the intensification of all power in the universe to do something, then you need to understand that you actually have been given all the tools, all the energy, all the authority to accomplish the thing. And we do weird stuff like we'll have the limiting belief and then we'll try to manipulate something to make it happen because we actually believe that we're not gonna have it. All of that mess is just a lack of trust. It really truly, what is it? A lack of trust and belief in yourself, but also a lack of trust and belief in the intensification of all power in the universe. You may as well be one of these goofy genetic evolutionists who believe that we started out as monkeys, because that's about as asinine as your idea that you can't do something is. Now, I will propose to you that if we were to look on the soul level and we were to look on the vibration level, it's very possible that monkeys are humans who devolved because of that kind of behavior. But not vice versa. Okay, so the premise is that what we really need to do then is understand that when we look in the mirror during this wilderness season, during the counting of the Omer, we look in the mirror and we see the intensification of all power in the universe. If you can't see that, then you are suffering from a lack of imagination produced by limiting beliefs, entitlements, and wounds. You get over those things, you use your imagination correctly. Here's a simple concept. If you close your eyes and you think of, say, a ice cream cone, I want you to think about this. If you close your eyes, what you actually see with your eyes is light shining through your eyelids, and it's usually the color red or yellow, depending on how bright it is. Okay? But somehow you see an ice cream cone with color in 3 dimensions. How is that possible? Because you are able to create with your mind. Now, how linked into that is the universe? Well, according to quantum physicists, consciousness controls the spin of quarks, which is light. So all things, let's go through this again. All things, okay, work together for the good of those who are called according to, or who love God and are called according to his purposes. All good things come down from the Father of lights. Light is quantum energy, and according to quantum physicists, is controlled by consciousness. So all those good things that come down from the Father of lights, that's working together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purposes, is controlled by you. Do you have the ability to control light like that? Yes. Do you think you do? Nope. You don't understand. You can dematerialize something with your mind. You can materialize something with your mind. You don't understand that. And because you don't understand that, you don't believe it. And the problem that we work with now is that we've been told by science, here's our limitations. We've been told by science, this is who we are. This is what we are. This is how the sun works. This is how the moon works. You know, we were having a discussion last night and I said, is there a dark side of the moon? And of course, people who were educated in that room said yes. And I said, okay. Is there anybody who says no? And then there was somebody who said no. And I said, okay. All of the moon is dark. But when the sun shines on the moon, when the light hits the moon and the moon reflects, that side is not dark. But there's still a side that's dark. Our understanding is the side where the light reflects. Otherwise, we don't see a moon. And so the same is true in the spiritual, where the light is seen or perceived or understood is how much we are able to operate in its capacity. Now, I know we're not ready for a conscious movement of light. I know we're not ready to manipulate light in order to change the physical laws of the universe, because there is plenty of limiting beliefs there. But you are ready to begin the physical process of striking out past the threshold into the dream or instruction you were given. And a dream is an instruction, but the difference between the two is you perceive it, it was your idea, because it was. But the idea that you perceived in the first place, you need to realize came down from the Father of Lights as a sovereign thought through you. Not ready for that one yet either. So what then have we arrived at? We've arrived at a concept that the energy of the wilderness season is all about the longing of the bride. She wants to be seen. She wants to be noticed, and she doesn't know if anybody actually chose her. And we won't know that till Pentecost, will we? So in the meanwhile, we have this longing to be, right? To be known, to be seen. In the book Captivating, it's that we as the bride are longing to be irreplaceable, irresistible, and valued. And so as we look at that context then in terms of spirituality, then we understand that it is our minds that are keeping us from this. And I will bet you that a lot of you who are tuned into the energies had a horrible day on day 25. But then on day 26, it didn't make any sense. I'll bet you were like, man, I have no idea why I was angry. I have no idea why I flew off the handle like that. I have no idea why I had these crazy visions in the night and had a horrible day. Because it was both the climax and it was the complete valley of those two verses. And now we see a decline in one and an incline in the other. And we will long for that spiritual high again, but we will be so glad to be through the suffering part of this thing. Now, I think there are exceptions to this, and I think this is very dynamic, but I think that's where we're going to stay with it. We're just going to let it be what it is and let the information communicate to us what we need to know at that moment. I want you to think about when you first began your journey, how much you didn't know and how much you know now. Are you shocked by what you know? Are you amazed by what you know? Is it a wow factor? Does it still have that voice of being the first time you experienced knowledge, like the first time you bite into a steak or a lamb chop or some really well roasted chicken? Does it taste like that still? Okay. So I want you to think about the different responses between the two vibrations. The vibration of the masters is how I got the cloud over here telling me different information than what you're trying to say. And what? And being reactive, like God brought us out here into the wilderness to die. He has no right to be letting me be treated this way. Why is the universe allowing this horrible things to happen? Right? Okay. All right. So then I'm going to say that one of the most important things you need to take away from this is that you will be satisfied now, but you still need to receive the light. Shabbat Shalom.